When it comes to buying a car, making a wrong choice can be expensive. So today I'm going to look at the different options and compare the pros and cons of each. And lastly, I'm going to discuss the other considerations that you'll want to think about when it comes to buying a car. And by the end of the video, you'll be in a much better place to make the best choice for you. So the first choice, probably the simplest, if you've got the money, is just paying by cash. So just going to the dealership, paying by cash, job done. So the second option will be getting a loan from the bank. So getting a loan from the bank, so going to your personal bank to get a loan, and then you get charged a fixed interest, and then you pay that every month, and then you use that money to pay for the car. The third option would be a lease. So a lease works similar to renting. So you would rent the car out for a period of time, and then by the end of the lease, you would then return it back. So you don't own the car, you'd return it back by the end of the lease. So the way it works is that you pay an initial deposit, which is typically about 10%. Then you would pay the rest monthly, and by the end of the lease, you would then return the car back. The fourth option is a hire purchase loan. So with that one you take out with the dealership. That one, the payment is broadly split into two parts. The first part is an initial payment, which is typically about 10% of the total agreement. And then the second payment is the rest of the value of the agreement. And that is typically split monthly. So you'd pay it like a fixed number monthly throughout the rest of the term. By the end of the agreement, you get to keep the car. One thing to note though is that the initial payment that you pay is usually slightly higher than the rest of the monthly payments. Also, it's worth noting that you don't get that initial payment back. So you're basically just paying off a bit more at the start. So you don't get that money back at the end. So the fifth option is a PCP, or personal contract purchase. This is a loan which is taken out with the dealership. This one is typically the most popular of the 5 choices. It's lower monthly payments compared to the hire purchase. One thing I suspect as to why is because you're able to get like a more luxury vehicle, so maybe like a Mercedes or an Audi or a BMW. So people are able to get a more like higher spec car, but still able to pay like lower monthly payments. So this typically is the most popular one. With this one, the payments are split into 3 parts. So the first part is an initial deposit. Initial deposit is typically about 10%. So the second part is your fixed monthly payments. And then the third part is a final payment, or sometimes it's often referred to as a balloon payment. So this will be the final payment that needs to be made. So typically the way it works is the first 2 payments, so the deposit and the monthly payments, usually that covers off the depreciation, so the drop in value of the car, and it also covers the interest in those first 3 years that you own the vehicle. The last payment typically covers the final value of the car. So typically, so in 3 years' time, what would a car be worth in 3 years' time? And that typically will be the amount that you have to pay off. So that would be the final payment. So with that one, it's optional. So with the final payment, it's optional. So you can either pay the amount in cash. So let's say you had 12K remaining from the balance of the car. So you could pay that off, or you can trade that in. So the second option would be trading that car in. So when you trade that car in, you'll be able to get another vehicle, like a newer spec Mercedes, for example. That's typically your options. So let's now move into the pros and cons and a comparison to really compare what the differences are between these different options. So I'm going to go through 6 considerations. So let's go through it. So we've got ownership at the end of the term, mileage restrictions, end of term payment, wear and tear charges, maintenance costs, and monthly payments. So I've broken that down. So when you look at when you look at the ownership at the end of the term, so with that one, the only one where you don't own it at the end of the term is leasing. So the rest of them, you either own it or you have an option to own it. So that's something to think about, whether you want to own it or not, what you want to do with the vehicle after. And also bearing in mind, you could own it and then sell it. So it might be advantageous to, like for example, if you went for a cash or a loan, for example, it might be advantageous to own it and then sell it after. You might make more money. So it's something to think about, even if you don't want to keep it. So it's something to think about there. Oh, one thing to note is with the leasing, you don't have to sell it. So peace of mind. That after that, the vehicle is returned, peace of mind, it's already gone. So maybe you might be someone that prefers that. You don't really want the hassle of trying to sell it. Leasing might be your option, or doing a PCP, for example, and then exchanging for another vehicle. The only one that has an end of term payment is the PCP. But even with that one, you still have the option. That one's optional because you could look to trade it for another vehicle. So you've got your wear and tear charges. So wear and tear charges, we all, like if you're someone that drives, you know that, typically if you're going to drive a car for a few years, it would be normal to expect some wear and tear. With that, so you've got leasing, hire purchase, and PCP. So with those ones, they tend to have wear and tear charges. So what you will need to do is look at your handbook. So when you sign the contract, it should say what is acceptable wear and tear. So it's important to really read through that and understand it, because I've heard of cases where it can become very expensive. I've heard of cases of 3K, 4K, even £5,000 in some cases. I don't know what they did to the car, but this is what they said that they were charged. So it can be expensive. And I heard it's like really wide ranging, that some with some dealerships it can be very, very minimal things, but then some dealerships can be more reasonable. So I'm not sure if it varies dealership to dealership. It's probably something to like for the same brand. I imagine it varies by manufacturer, but I'm not sure if it varies by dealership. That's something maybe one of you guys might know in the comments. You can let us know. But certainly from manufacturer to manufacturer, that can vary. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about which choice of car that you want to go for. So next, looking at maintenance costs. So looking at the maintenance costs, so we've got with the leasing, that's quite a consideration. So with leasing, you get a lower maintenance cost. Cash and loan, I've put it depends. So the reason for putting it depends is because with cash, in theory, you have lower maintenance costs, but it could be more expensive. So for example, if you pay by cash or you go for a loan, it could be more expensive where it's a car that's breaks down a lot and maybe you've bought it outside of your warranty period. That's where it could be an issue. But if you're buying a car brand new, it should be typically covered by the warranty. However, it doesn't always include the likes of brakes and tires and so on. So sometimes that could be also required, even though it has a warranty. So that's again something to look at when you're looking to buy the vehicle, is what is exactly covered in the maintenance costs, because again that can be really expensive as well, especially if you're going for a high spec car, because with the high spec cars they tend to be quite specialist items. If you're going for like a BMW or a Mercedes and you need a tire change, that can be a lot of money, because it's going to be really massive tires, and typically it tends to be like your luxury brands like Continental and Pirelli and so on and so forth, where more quality parts but it's going to be more expensive. And also it tends to be quite custom parts as well, so BMW only, Mercedes only, etc. So it can add up. So definitely something to look into. What exactly is included in the maintenance costs? With leasing, I understand that it is included. With hire purchase, it's not. So that's something to think about. And PCP is optional. It depends. Monthly payments is your priority. Typically, of course, cash, you wouldn't have any monthly payments to make. But PCP tends to be the lowest one, which is why it's the most popular, as I was saying earlier before. So that one tends to be much lower. So typically, a lot of people are able to then trade up and get like a more expensive vehicle when it comes to when they have a PCP than they would otherwise be able to afford. If not, hire purchase tends to be more expensive on a monthly basis. But there are cases where it can be actually cheaper. So that's something to actually watch out for. The hire purchase can actually be cheaper in some cases than a PCP over the length of the contract. So it really depends on the, on the amount of, on the car that you're buying and the amount of like depreciation that happens of the vehicle. There are some cars where on a monthly basis it might be higher, the hire purchase, but actually if you look at over the course of the actual contract, the hire purchase is actually lower, cheaper than the PCP. So again, it comes back to what you want to do with the vehicle by the end of it, and also your situation in terms of what you're able to afford monthly as well, your affordability. That's something to think about. For loan and leasing, I've put it depends, because with the loan, for example, you got to consider like your credit rating. It can change. Also in terms of the economy. So right now the interest rates are quite high at the moment, so loans might be typically quite expensive. Also with leasing, again, similar things as well in terms of why it might be high. So loan and leasing, it depends. You would have to look into that. But typically cash would be lower monthly payment. So these are next considerations I feel is really important to consider when it comes to buying a car. So dealerships make their most money from PCP finance. So they will be looking to encourage, let's say, the customer to get the PCP where they can. So be aware of it. It's the most lucrative for them. And the reason for that is because, well, one, over the length of the contract, sometimes it's more expensive, even though it's like lower monthly payments. It can be more expensive over the long run, particularly if it's much longer than even a hire purchase agreement. So with that, one of the issues is that quite a lot of people that take on PCP finance are not actually able to pay off that final payment. They don't have the money to pay it off. Because of that, people then will then end up exchanging their car and then taking up another PCP. So if you imagine the money, over that period of time, some people really it's like a trap. It's a cycle that they get stuck in. It's PCP finance, another PCP finance, another PCP finance, and they're not spending a lot of money on it. Now, it's fine if you want to go down that route, because some people like it. They like trading their car every 3 years or every so often, and that's fine. But some people don't intend to be down that rabbit hole, so to say. So some people can feel trapped. So it's definitely important to do your numbers, have a think about it, and just consider and just make sure that it's right for you before you make that choice. Another consideration to think about is whether the car actually needs to be new. One option that I've not covered so far, but one option you can think about is, instead of buying brand new, you could also think about buying a car that's perhaps 2 or 3 years old. Reason for that is because the depreciation tends to be the most at the start of a car's life, and then reduces as time goes on. So typically the first 2 to 3 years tends to be where the most depreciation is. So if you can get a car maybe after 2-3 years, it's likely to be, most of the depreciation's already happened. Then it tends to slow down as time goes on. So it's something to think about, whether it's something that you can do, because you can get some really nice savings on your vehicle when you can do that. So perhaps if you've got the money, you could perhaps pay by cash, or you can perhaps look at taking out a loan from the bank and then possibly paying it off that way, or look at some of the other options that we talked about before in terms of the other finance options that we talked about before. So certainly I'll leave that to you to do your, to have a look at the different options, but that's definitely an option that you can think about, because I understand that, quite a lot of people can save a lot of money through that way. As soon as you drive off from the dealership, the car's already depreciating. So by the time you get home, it's already depreciating. So it's definitely, it's crazy the way, the way depreciation happens with cars, but it is what it is. Next consideration to think about is whether the car actually holds its value, how well it holds its value over the course of when it comes to resale. So there are some cars, not all cars are the same. Some cars are, much better maintenance records than others. So typically it tends to be your, Japanese cars, for example, your Toyotas, Hondas, got really good record when it comes to reliability. And then, some German cars also. And then, on the other scale, there are some cars that are typically, always ranking pretty low when it comes to reliability. So that's something to think about as well. If you've got like a car that's, got constant maintenance issues, that's also, a consideration as well in terms of what the resale value is likely to be by the end of it. That's something to think about. Another thing to think about is, if you've got the cash to actually buy a car outright, is what would be the opportunity cost, because instead of buying cash outright, particularly if you go for the more higher spec vehicles as well, your Mercedes, your Audis, etc., that money could have been perhaps used on, in terms of the stock market. It could have been invested. It could have even been maybe put into real estate. It could be put into lots of other things. So it's something to think about whether that's actually the wisest decision to make, because you are locking that money in for quite a long period of time. So that money could have been used in, maybe even in a savings account, high paying savings account. It could have been, it could be used there too. So it's worth also considering what your different options are in terms of how you use the money, and whether it's actually the best option. And lastly, I would say, just consider the brand, consider the make, consider what you want, what you want to do with the vehicle, what your options are, and just make sure you do your affordability check and make sure you make the right choice for you. But I think with these options that we've covered, it definitely put you in a better position. Let me know in the comments how you like to finance your car, what your best tips are, when it comes to financing a car. So subscribe and like the vehicle. We're looking to come up with lots of related content, when it comes to car finance. So let me know what questions and issues that you have, and I'll look at, making a video on it. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.